A retired Air Force general walked out of his New Mexico home, leaving behind his glasses and every device that could track him, and he vanished with no explanation and no trace. A seasoned hiker set out for a hike to the summit of Mount Waterman with two other experienced hikers. One of her companions saw her wave to him on the trail, and moments later, she had disappeared without a trace. Another woman in New Mexico left behind her keys, wallet, and car, walked away from her home, and vanished without a trace. Both her cell phones were found to be factory reset. A young father was killed on his doorstep in Brookline, Massachusetts. A man living in a remote area of Antelope Valley in California was shot dead on his front porch. In Ohio, a man killed his wife and a coworker before taking his own life, making sure it was captured by a surveillance camera. In Massachusetts, a man was mysteriously missing for 3 months before his remains were found in a lake. These cases all have circumstances and facts that are their own, and at first glance, none of them seem to be connected. None of them seem to have anything to do with each other. Why would they? However, when you start laying the names down side by side, the connections begin to float to the surface, and the coincidences stop looking like coincidences. These incidents did not happen over the course of many years. They happened throughout 2025 and into the early months of 2026. Today, we are going to start to talk about 10 people. 3 are currently missing, the rest are dead. And the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another true crime video. I am excited to talk to you about this topic today because in some loose way I've been tracking these cases and putting these pieces together without even knowing I was putting pieces together. And I've been doing this since late December of 2025. But before we dive into that world, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video. This video is sponsored by June's Journey, and honestly, this one feels very on brand for us because if you love a good mystery, and I know you do, you might actually really enjoy this. It's a hidden object detective game set in the 1920s, which already has that whole moody, glamorous, vintage vibe, think Great Gatsby, and you play as June Parker, who's trying to solve her sister's murder while uncovering all these layered family secrets. So it's not just random gameplay, there's an actual story unfolding as you go, and every scene you complete gives you more clues. And what I like about it is it's one of those games you can pick up when you want to unwind, but it still keeps you mentally engaged. You're scanning these really detailed, beautiful scenes, looking for hidden objects that a lot of them are very, of the time, of the 1920s. And so sometimes I'll come across an object I've never heard of before and I'll look it up and then I learn something. And it kind of feels like you're piecing together evidence at your own pace, like a much calmer version of what we usually talk about here. I love to grab my phone and play a little June's Journey at the end of a long day where my brain has been occupied by all of the darkness of the world. It's such a gorgeous and stimulating escape. Instead of just mindlessly scrolling on social media, I'm engaging my brain and retreating to a vivid and mysterious world. But what's really fun right now is that they're doing a special Agatha Christie collaboration, which, let's be honest, feels like it was made for true crime people. You actually get to work alongside Hercule Poirot, and the mysteries are inspired by stories like Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile, so it really has that classic old school detective feel where everything is a clue and nothing is random. And if you grew up reading or watching Agatha Christie adaptions, or you just like those really clever layered mystery plots, it is a very cool way to kind of step into that world yourself. Now, if you do love Agatha Christie, I'm curious as to what your favorite novel is. I've always been obsessed with the Seven Dials mystery because it's got secret societies and government intrigue. You guys know I love that stuff. And they actually recently adapted the book into a Netflix series, and it was awesome. All that stuff is right up my alley, which is why June's Journey has consistently remained my go-to game for years at this point. We've talked about June's Journey before. I love playing it. You guys love June's Journey. I've heard from you in the comments. There's also this progression aspect to the game that I didn't expect to like as much as I did, where you can decorate your own island as you go. So as you solve more cases, you unlock more items and kind of build out your own space, which is weirdly satisfying and also intensely enjoyable. So June's Journey has that mix of story, puzzle solving, and a little bit of creativity, depending on what you're in the mood for, which, I mean, we love that here, right? We love that here. We puzzle solve. We get into the mystery. We're creative. So if you want to try June's Journey out for yourself, you can download it for free using the link in my description, or you can just scan the QR code on your screen. And if you do play, tell me if you're good at spotting the clues, because I feel like some of you would be very good. Thank you so much to June's Journey for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. It feels like in the last month or so, everything kind of reached a fever pitch, and then I found out other people and other sources who were also quietly scribbling on their whiteboards and making the connections, and I've been down the rabbit hole ever since. I am really sort of at a loss at this point. There's some weird stuff happening in the world, and there's probably always been weird stuff happening in the world. We just haven't been privy to it. So between what we're going to talk about today and what we've been talking about with Jeffrey Epstein, I feel like something's going to happen. Things are about to go down. We are going to see a lot of things changing. The world we live in changing, at least to our perception. And maybe we'll figure out that it's always been this way. We just have been living in a non-reality at this point. But the people I talked about in the intro of this video, they are connected through multiple things. They're connected through geographic clusters in the United States, where military, aerospace intelligence, and advanced research activities are heavily concentrated and interconnected. A networked ecosystem of military bases, labs, contractors, and universities that all feed into each other. These people all worked in fields that focused on things like space systems, weapons development, nuclear energy, advanced materials, surveillance, classified programs. And what happened to all of these people got various levels of news coverage as the time went on. Surface level explanations of what the cases were, nothing that went too deep, and always saying like, hey, we don't really know what happened here, but we're still investigating. Until the disappearance of General William Neal McCasland on February 27, 2026, when major news networks began reporting on his case, as well as its potential connections to some of the other cases. News Nation's Russ Coulthart has called McCasland's disappearance a grave national security crisis for the United States of America, because McCasland is, quote, a man with some of the most sensitive secrets of the United States in his head, end quote. So, it is with the disappearance of General William McCasland that we will start. On the morning of February 27th, 2026, sometime after 10 a.m., 67-year-old William Neal McCasland left his home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and apparently set out on foot, leaving behind his prescription glasses, cell phone, and wearable devices. His wife, Susan, returned home from an appointment around noon, and she reported him missing at 3:07 p.m. Now, the only things that Susan could identify as being missing from the home that she shared with her husband was his wallet, his hiking boots, and a .38 caliber revolver with a leather holster. Now, it has been reported that McCasland is an experienced hiker and an avid outdoorsman, and he lives at 1701 Quail Run Court, a cul-de-sac in Sandia Heights. In this photo, you can see that the foothills of the Cibola National Forest were basically in his backyard, and McCasland was known for enjoying hiking and cycling in the Sandia Mountains, which is located in that area behind his home. Law enforcement in this case, they did the things that they usually did. They looked for him. They asked neighbors to submit any security camera footage they had of the time period where McCasland was believed to have left home. They asked anyone who was in the Sandia Mountains on February 27th or 28th to check their GoPro and camera footage, and they created a dedicated evidence portal where users could upload their videos and pictures. Investigators have canvassed more than 700 homes and have searched a vast stretch of terrain using dogs, drones, ground teams, and helicopters. The police also issued a silver alert, citing concern for McCasland's safety due to his medical issues. Now, this is weird, and I'm not the only one who thought it was weird. A lot of people, including Ross Coulthart, have said, this is weird. Why did they do this? So in New Mexico, the criteria for a silver alert applies to someone who is over the age of 50, and they have to have a clear indication that the individual has an irreversible deterioration of intellectual faculties. That's not something I made up. I'm going to put it up on the screen. You'll be able to see that is the criteria for a silver alert in New Mexico. And this is odd considering who General William McCasland is and was, and the fact that he was an incredibly intelligent and active man who had just gone on a 60-mile bike ride the week before he vanished into thin air. So during a news conference on March 16th, law enforcement said the silver alert remained in effect, and it had been issued because McCasland previously reported that he was experiencing a mental fog. But Lieutenant Kyle Woods of the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office made sure to clarify that investigators did not believe McCasland was cognitively impaired at the time of his disappearance.
I'll clarify it with this. There's no indication, and we are not putting forward that Mr. McCasland was disoriented, confused. Arguably, he would still be the most intelligent person in the room that any of us would be in. Highly intelligent, highly capable, but that information was given to us early on, and out of an abundance of caution, we escalated to a silver alert to try to garner as much public attention as possible to try to help locate him as soon as possible.
And yeah, that is just odd to me. It's off because, as I said, a silver alert goes out when the person has an irreversible deterioration of intellectual faculties. And so somebody, most likely General McCasland's wife, Susan, had told the police that McCasland had a mental fog months before he went missing. And I just don't know if that would qualify for that. I don't know if having a mental fog or saying you had a mental fog months before you disappeared would qualify as your mental state or your faculties deteriorating irreversibly. I mean, I had a mental fog yesterday, and I'll probably have another one tomorrow, maybe even later today. But let's listen to Susan McCasland's call to 911 when she reported her husband missing. And she'll introduce herself with a different last name. That would be her maiden name. And I don't know if she changed her name when she got married or if she kept her maiden name, but I'm just calling her Susan McCasland so you understand that I'm referring to Susan, General McCasland's wife.
Hi, April. My name is Susan Wilkerson. My husband is missing.
Okay.
And it's been about 3 hours, and I have some indication that he must have planned not to be found. He's left his phone. He changed his clothes into I don't know what. I think he's on foot. All of our cars and bicycles are in the garage. I left for a doctor's appointment at about 11:10, and he was here at that time at the house. And I got back from that at noon, and he was gone. He turned it off and left it behind, which seems kind of deliberate because he's always got his phone. He has a smartwatch. I don't know if that's with him or not.
Has he ever done this before?
Never. Nothing even remotely like it. He's a retired Air Force Major General. He's very responsible, but he's also facing some medical issues.
Do you have any video at your home?
No.
Has he been diagnosed with any mental disorders or anything like that?
Well, we've been seeing a doc for both physical and mental in terms of anxiety, short-term memory loss, lack of sleep. The same doc I went to see today.
Does he carry any weapons on him?
Well, not generally. He does have a gun safe, and I went to look in the gun safe to see if anything was missing, but I couldn't tell if anything was. He has quite a number of pistols and rifles. Other than saying if his brain and body keep deteriorating, he didn't want to live like that. But it seemed to me that was just a, man, I hate how this is going kind of thing, because I told him, yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Okay. We're going to send some deputies up to talk to you, see if you can search a little bit and see what's going on, okay?
Sure.
Susan said it seemed deliberate, right? Her husband leaving, walking away from the house on foot, leaving behind any of his devices that could help locate him. This must have been something he planned to do, and he planned to not be found. Now, Susan also does suggest that maybe McCasland had been depressed because of his brain fog and mental deterioration, but she also says that she doesn't think that he took his own life. It was more of a regular, like, hey, I'm aging, this sucks, I don't like this, especially for somebody like McCasland, who, as we'll come to find, he was very intelligent, brilliant, illustrious career. So yeah, I could see somebody like that having a hard time getting older and dealing with just the regular cognitive decline that comes along with that. And even if General McCasland was like, oh, I've got some anxiety and brain fog, I want to end it all, which why would he do that? But even if he wanted to do that, wouldn't he still wear his prescription glasses to get to the place that he planned to go in order to end it all? I wear prescription glasses, and it's not one of those things where it's like, oh, I can't read without my glasses. It's like, I'm probably not going to go hiking in the wilderness, in the mountains, in the forest without my glasses because I need to see things, right? So it doesn't make any sense, all right? And I believe at this point, law enforcement has said, hey, we don't think that General McCasland took his own life or intended to harm himself. Like, as far as our investigation has brought us, we have not found any sign of that. It was also reported that McCasland had a second home in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, about 35 miles north of the New Mexico border and 200 miles from his New Mexico home. It was also reported that McCasland had a second home in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, about 35 miles north of the New Mexico border and 200 miles from his New Mexico home. So I guess police were like, well, maybe he went there to hide out, whatever. Obviously, he couldn't walk there on foot. He could, but not anytime soon. It'd take him a long time. So the investigators did search there, and then they reported that they found hiking boots. And I'm not sure why they told us that, because if I had two homes and I liked hiking and both of my homes were located in places where there might be mountains to hike in, I might have two pairs of hiking boots. Like if I had a second home, I can afford to have a second pair of hiking boots. But they did. They told us, oh, we found hiking boots at his home. Not the same hiking boots, just hiking boots. So on March 7th, 8 days after he disappeared, a gray U.S. Air Force sweatshirt was found a little over a mile from McCasland's home. Now, this sweatshirt, it's reported constantly when you read the story, but it hasn't even been confirmed to belong to General William McCasland. Yes, he was in the Air Force, but there's no proof or sign that it's his sweatshirt. Outside of that, there has literally been no trace of this man, even though law enforcement has used every search method and tool at their disposal. So why would the disappearance of a retired U.S. Air Force general potentially pose a serious threat to our country's national security? Well, to tell you that, we have to know who William McCasland is and what he's done throughout his very exciting and illustrious life. William McCasland grew up in an Air Force family, the son of Lieutenant William H. McCasland and Robin McCasland. And when he was young, his father was killed in a flying accident, and his mother remarried Lieutenant William R. Casey, another airman. So McCasland attended the United States Air Force Academy. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in astronautical engineering in 1979. He went on to receive a full scholarship from the Hertz Foundation, and he got his master's degree in aeronautical engineering in 1980. After this, McCasland served in the Payload Systems Division with the Secretary of the Air Force of Special Projects at Los Angeles Air Force Base. So I said a lot of things there. And I didn't know what any of it meant, so I obviously had to look into it. So the Secretary of the Air Force Special Projects was actually a highly classified division of the Air Force, responsible for top secret space and reconnaissance programs. Understand, this is not standard Air Force work. This is what they call deep black program territory. So in the U.S. military and the intelligence world, programs fall into a few different categories. Unclassified, meaning, everyone knows. Classified, meaning it's not public knowledge, kept secret, but, the government will still acknowledge it exists if they need to. And then black programs, which are super secret and not publicly acknowledged at all. We're talking advanced weapons systems, experimental aerospace projects, who knows what else. Access to these projects is limited to people with the top secret clearance and who are special access program approved. So we can use context to figure out what kind of super secret stuff William McCasland was working on. He worked in the payload systems division, which you see a lot in military and government terms, payload. And I had no idea what that meant. It sounds like the most boring word ever. But it basically means he was working on the part of satellites that collect information and do missions. And he was doing this at Los Angeles Air Force Base, which is a space and acquisition hub, which is now home to Space Systems Command. Now, historically, the Los Angeles Air Force Base was the center of satellite development, defense contractor coordination with companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, and classified space programs. Given all of that, it is very likely that McCasland was working on highly classified satellite programs tied to intelligence collection and or national security infrastructure. And that was just in the early 1980s, because in 1985, McCasland returned to MIT to complete a doctorate in astronautical engineering, where his dissertation was about making complex, flexible aerospace systems smart enough to stabilize themselves and keep working, even if parts of the systems break off or fall apart. So his thesis advisor was Richard Batten. Richard Batten is a legendary aerospace engineer at MIT, best known for helping design the guidance system that got astronauts to the moon during the Apollo program. And if you don't remember, because it's been such a long time, that was back in the 70s. So after this, General McCasland returned to the Los Angeles Air Force Base as an assistant director of the Office of Special Projects. This means he was working inside a top secret Air Force office that handled advanced space and surveillance systems, not just working, but leading major projects, managing teams, and overseeing development. He was involved in the early development of spy satellites, so systems that take images from space, intercept signals, and track activity globally. In 1992, McCasland moved to Buckley Air Force Base in Colorado, where he served as the director of mission planning for the Aerospace Data Facility. Buckley is a major hub for satellite operations, intelligence gathering, and space-based surveillance. And the ADF is a ground station that receives data from satellites in space. So at this point, General McCasland wasn't just collecting data, he was deciding what the satellites should focus on, when they should collect data, how to prioritize different targets, etc. So this moved McCasland from building the satellite systems to using them. He then took a break from this job to attend Air War College at Maxfield Air Force Base, a place for people being groomed for top leadership roles who would be trained on things like military planning, strategy, global conflict, national security. He also went to the Defense Systems Management College, where he learned how to manage large and complex defense programs with budgets of billions of dollars while working with contractors and overseeing classified projects. And he's going to need that information. He's going to need that education and knowledge later on in life. He then returned to Buckley, where he was put in command of the Aerospace Data Facility. So to put it simply, McCasland was pulled out of his job at the Aerospace Data Facility. He was trained at elite military schools to become a senior leader in charge of very classified secret information, and then he returned to take command of a unit responsible for operating U.S. spy satellite systems. By 1997, McCasland was back at Los Angeles Air Force Base, where he spent the next 3 years as the chief engineer of the Navstar GPS Joint Program Office. So basically Navstar, it's like GPS stuff for military, but also for the private sector, like what our phones use to, get us from place to place. In 2000, McCasland took control of the Space-Based Laser Project Office, meaning he became the person in charge of a program trying to build lasers in space for military use. Now, a space-based laser, I didn't even know we had those. I'm very behind, but we do. It's a laser weapon placed on a satellite designed to track and potentially destroy targets, especially missiles, shortly after launch. So if another country sends a missile towards us, we've got these lasers on satellites. Apparently, they can take them out. In 2001, McCasland moved to Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, where he was appointed commander of the Phillips Research Center. Remember this. So Kirtland is a major Air Force research facility that develops advanced space technology. At this site, McCasland worked on a lot of things: spacecraft technology, laser systems again, and advanced materials. Advanced materials, put a pin in that. In 2005, McCasland was back at the Los Angeles Air Force Base, now the vice commander of the Space and Missile Systems Center. And 2 years later, he was made the director of space acquisition at the Pentagon. So now he's at the Pentagon, okay? Pretty high up Department of Defense stuff. In this role, McCasland helped decide what space systems get built, which companies build them, like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and how a budget consisting of billions of dollars would be spent. In 2009, McCasland moved into the Office of the Secretary of Defense and became Director of Special Programs, the most sensitive, classified programs in the U.S. government. I think they call them SAPs, like Special Access Programs. But when you hear people say SAPs or SAP or something like that, that's what they're talking about, Special Access Programs or Special Programs. We're talking advanced weapons that 99.9999999% of people will never get to know about. And even less people will get to know everything about them, because I've come to find that in these Special Access Programs, when you're dealing with such classified information, not one person is going to have all the information for everything about the program. They're going to have like everybody sort of split up, and this guy knows this, and this guy knows this, and this girl knows that. And then when they come together and like give their reports to whoever is reading the reports, then all the information comes together, but very, very, very few people are going to see the full picture. We're also talking experimental technology that the mind cannot even perceive is actually being researched and created there. These special access programs, like weapons that you would maybe see in, futuristic movies, but you'd think, oh, we'll never have that. We probably already do. He also became executive secretary for the Special Access Program Oversight Committee, with full purview of all America's most sensitive and secretive knowledge, capabilities, and programs. In May of 2011, General McCasland left the Pentagon for his final posting, assuming command of the Air Force Research Lab at Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where he was in charge of multi-billion-dollar budgets for research into advanced and often classified materials, science, and future weapons research across one of the largest scientific centers in the Department of Defense, the Air Force Research Lab. We're going to talk about that a lot. So McCasland oversaw billions of dollars in research in advanced materials, sensors, directed energy, aka lasers, space systems, and future weapons. Now, this specific Air Force base, Wright-Patterson, it also has ties to aliens, extraterrestrials, a topic that has been in the news a lot as of late. Don't roll your eyes or turn off the video. I'm going somewhere with this. You're just going to have to trust me. Stay with me here. So in 1947, something crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. We all know about this. At first, the military said it was a flying disc, and everyone was like, what? And then they quickly changed their story, and they said, no, our bad, we were wrong. It's a weather balloon. It's always a weather balloon. Now, there were a lot of people who didn't believe the weather balloon story. They believed that the wreckage was an alien spacecraft, and that the U.S. military not only recovered a craft that day, but biological material from that crash site. And these recovered materials were transferred from New Mexico to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio for study. Because remember, at the Air Force Base, they have the materials, I think it's called the Materials Directorate or something like that, or directive, but they study and try to replicate advanced materials. So for decades, this story has stayed kind of on the fringe. We talk about it in internet forums. It's labeled a conspiracy theory. Some people are like, maybe, but how could the government lie about it for this long? But there is some evidence to support all of this and kind of bring it away from the fringes. First of all, Wright-Patterson did have facilities for analyzing foreign technology and materials. There are long-standing units whose job it is to take unknown or foreign technology and figure out exactly what it is, how it works, and how to replicate it. How to reverse engineer it, basically. In July of 2023, the U.S. House Oversight Committee held a public hearing on UAPs, right? So unidentified aerial phenomena, which is the same thing as UFOs. We just call it something different now because I guess UFOs got a bad rap. You know, it was like, we don't like UFOs anymore. That sounds kind of cheesy. We're going to call them UAPs now, because that's more legitimate. So during the hearing, 3 military veterans testified. David Grush, Ryan Graves, and David Fravor. So David Grush is a former U.S. Air Force major and intelligence officer with the Pentagon's UAP task force, which remember means unidentified aerial phenomena. And he said under oath that the U.S. has operated a multi-decade program to recover and reverse engineer craft of non-human origin. He also claimed that biological material was recovered from Roswell and from other crash sites, and this biological material was not human. He alleged that these programs are hidden from Congress and some are improperly shielded within SAPs, Special Access Programs.
But as I stand here under oath now, I am speaking to the facts as I've been told them. In the U.S. Air Force, in my National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, reservist capacity, I was a member of the UAP Task Force from 2019 to 2021. I served at the NRO Operations Center on the Director's Briefing Staff, which included the coordination of the Presidential Daily Brief and supporting a variety of contingency operations, which I was the Reserve Intelligence Division Chief backup. In 2019, the UAP Task Force Director asked me to identify all special access programs and controlled access programs, also known as SAPs and CAPs, we needed to satisfy our congressionally mandated mission, and we were direct report at the time to the DepSecDef. At the time, due to my extensive executive level intelligence support duties, I was cleared to literally all relevant compartments and in a position of extreme trust, both in my military and civilian capacities. I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, to which I was denied access to those additional read-ons when I requested it. I made the decision, based on the data I collected, to report this information to my superiors and multiple inspectors general, and in effect becoming a whistleblower. As you know, I've suffered retaliation for my decision, but I am hopeful that my actions will ultimately lead to a positive outcome of increased transparency. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Okay, we'll come back to that, but let's return to General William McCasland, who held his position commanding the Air Force Research Lab at Wright-Patterson from May of 2011 until his retirement in October of 2013, I believe. It may have been 2016. I've seen it reported different places. But also keep in mind that he wasn't just really at Wright-Patterson for a few years. He was there longer, but just not in control of that research lab. And also, please understand, when General William McCasland vanished in February of 2026, he was not just some, older retired Air Force general who was playing shuffleboard. He was still very active in his work and in work that directly connected to the United States government and military. So after he retired, McCasland became the director of technology at a place called Applied Technology Associates in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This was an aerospace firm specializing in precision sensing for ground, air, and space applications. ATA would later be absorbed by defense contractor Blue Halo. And in 2025, Blue Halo was acquired by AeroVironment. So ATA, the place where General McCasland went to when he retired, Blue Halo, and AeroVironment, they're all kind of the same. These are all defense contractors, companies that build sensors, space payloads, and laser systems for the Department of the Defense, for the government, for the military. So on March 3rd, 2026, AeroVironment announced a $30 million expansion of its New Mexico manufacturing campus at the Sandia Science and Technology Park that would focus on laser systems, space payloads, and advanced defense electronics. And once again, space payloads. Payloads are basically just like the equipment that we send out to space. Yeah, so from what I can tell, payload is a word that describes many things. Like it can be space payload, weapons payload, and basically it just means like if you send like something out into space, everything that's sent out into space, the materials that are sent out to do the job, like collect information or watch things or whatever, that's the payload. So like satellites and things like that, that's basically space payloads. And if you're talking weapons payloads, you're basically talking about like missiles, bombs, stuff like that. It's whatever is being carried out into space or out into war or battle or whatever. So McCasland went from running one of the Air Force's top research labs to operating inside of a network of private companies and organizations that built and influenced the same kinds of technologies that are usually sold to the government and military. So in June of 2019, McCasland also joined the board of trustees for Riverside Research, a nonprofit chartered to advance scientific research for the benefit of the United States government and in the public interest, as an afterthought, I'm sure. However, their biggest customer is, hands down, the U.S. government. They have a $450 million contract with active defense and intelligence. They do things like machine learning, electromagnetics, plasma physics, intelligence systems, all the same stuff McCasland's been doing since the 80s. So in 2021, General McCasland started DBE Consulting, LLC, and this was a company that advised clients across the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. So at that point, McCasland was giving strategic and technical advice to the government and military. So when he disappeared, he wasn't just a retired general who faded into obscurity and, picked up a hobby of like making toy planes. He was still actively working on important technology and research with the United States government and military. He was just doing it from the private sector. Okay? He wasn't somebody that wouldn't know things, is what I mean. We also need to talk about General McCasland's wife, Susan, who was, and I'm sure still is, an impressive woman in her own right, and she had an illustrious career. She's clearly also very smart, brilliant, knows what she's talking about. So William McCasland married Susan Wilkerson on April 7th, 1985, and at that time, if you remember, McCasland was at MIT finishing his doctorate under Richard Batten. Susan earned her PhD in astrophysics from the University of Arizona in 1979. So like I said, brilliant. The following year, she was actually selected as a NASA Mission Specialist Astronaut finalist at Johnson Space Center. Susan was in Group 9. This is the group famous for producing Sally Ride, the first American woman to travel into space aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger. So being a finalist in that group, and at that time, it meant that Susan was considered top tier because NASA's selection process is extremely competitive, and it especially was back then when it was new and burgeoning. Thousands of people apply. Only a small group is selected as finalists. Susan was one of them. She ultimately was not selected for the mission. Instead, she went into the Air Force where she was commissioned as a lieutenant. And what you will see as Susan goes throughout her career is someone operating at a very high level inside the same defense, space, and intelligence ecosystem as her husband, William McCasland. So by 1984, Susan had been advanced to captain. She held the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserve. She was a senior scientist at the Air Force Geophysics Lab in Sunspot, New Mexico, and chief of the data recorder branch at Headquarters Space Division. She also worked as the director of advanced studies at the Defense Decimation Program. So the Defense Decimation Program was the secure system that took classified satellite data and delivered it to the military and intelligence community. And working in that program at that place, it meant that Susan was directly involved with sensitive national security intelligence. So after active duty, Susan moved into the private sector. She worked for the Analytics Science Corporation, Boeing, Raytheon, major defense contractors working on aerospace systems, intelligence technology, and military programs. And this is where she was when she married General William McCasland. Susan is not and was never just a military spouse. She had a career that spanned NASA-level science, Air Force intelligence, linked satellite systems, and major defense contractors. So let's fast forward to 2016, when both General McCasland and his wife Susan were technically retired from government and military work. They were working for and in the private sector, still connected to the government and military. And that's the year that WikiLeaks, led by Julian Assange from the Ecuadorian embassy in London, published thousands of hacked emails from the Democratic National Committee. Later that year, WikiLeaks released daily installments of emails from John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. And we're not here to talk about all the political implications. We're not here to talk about anything besides one specific slice of these emails. And that specific slice of emails is cooler than politics because it has to do with extraterrestrials, right? Aliens. Now, John Podesta, I don't know if you knew because I didn't, but he's been a prominent advocate for UAP transparency for over 2 decades. He's consistently pushed for the declassification of government files, along with many others. Podesta has stated that he influenced Hillary Clinton to pledge the release of government UFO records, including those related to Area 51. He wanted her to do that if she were elected. Now, through the leaked emails, we found out that Podesta had communicated with someone called Edgar Mitchell several times throughout 2015 and 2016. Edgar Mitchell was a former NASA astronaut, naval officer, and scientist who's best known for being one of the few humans to ever walk on the moon. He flew on the Apollo 14 mission. I think he's either 6 or 7 to walk on the moon. I think it was 7, actually. I think he was the 7th person. I don't know exactly. But before NASA, Mitchell was a U.S. Navy test pilot. He had a PhD in aeronautics and astronautics, and he was highly trained in space systems engineering and navigation. All right, so he's no joke. Once again, not a crazy person, an intelligent person, an educated person. He knows his shit when it comes to, space and rockets and being an astronaut. Okay, so Edgar Mitchell goes to the moon in 1971. And while he walked on the moon, he claims he quietly conducted ESP experiments. He wanted to see if a person in space could mentally send or receive information from someone on Earth, right? So using Zener cards, we've talked about Zener cards before. We talked about them in the Gateway program video we did this past October. But for anybody who doesn't know or didn't see that video, they're basically just flashcards with different shapes and symbols on them. So Mitchell and some pre-selected people on Earth, they looked at their cards, and Mitchell tried to guess what symbol the people on Earth were seeing. And after the mission, Mitchell said that the results were better than random chance, and he said in his view this meant that some form of ESP might be real, that it might be, valid. And he was using people that were already psychically trained. I believe in this, unofficial study that he did, there were a few people back on Earth who weren't officially trained in being a psychic or didn't have that gift or hadn't, expressed it before, but there were people who had, what they claimed to be a psychic gift. And what we're talking about here is remote viewing. So Edgar Mitchell later said that his experience in space deeply affected him, not necessarily the ESP experiment, but just being in space in general, seeing the Earth from the moon, all of these things. And this led him to become more interested in things like consciousness, and it eventually led him to found the Institute of Noetic Sciences, focused on consciousness and human potential. He wrote books. He was really into thinking and feeling like the human brain and the human soul and what we are is capable of so much more than we know, and he wanted to tap into that. So after the Apollo 14 mission, Mitchell described having what he called an overview effect. He said that seeing Earth from space made him feel a deep interconnectedness and also made him feel that life might not be limited to Earth. Now, he said very plainly, I never saw any aliens. I never saw anything that suggested something was there on the moon or out in space. I never saw anything. I just felt that. I felt that, hey, I'm in space. There's the Earth. We can't be the only ones out here, which I think a lot of us can understand. Edgar Mitchell later claimed that people he trusted, especially those connected to military and intelligence circles, told him that the U.S. had recovered non-human craft. Now, Mitchell also happened to grow up in New Mexico, near the site of the Roswell incident, and he said that people in that area believed something unusual happened. They always believed it. They saw things. And he later came to believe that the official explanation didn't tell the full story.
Well, it isn't just government. It is the classic cabal of people want to control things. And it's bigger than government. It's a military-industrial complex that Eisenhower talked about. And learning how to break that down, learning to get it opened up so that we really have free flow of information is a major problem at this point.
But why do you think this military complex is so intense? Is it control?
Profit motive.
Oh, it's all profit.
I imagine it's rooted in the profit motive.
It's so
and controlling these types of technologies.
Yeah, because they'll lose that control if they acknowledge that there's...
Essentially, yes.
It's
certainly not our political form in our government. It's deeper than that.
So Edgar Mitchell is emailing John Podesta, and he claimed in the emails that extraterrestrials were real, they were peaceful, and they were mainly concerned with nuclear weapons, which I think we all are. Now, one specific email was requesting a meeting between Edgar Mitchell and John Podesta, and it said, quote, "As John is aware, more than 20 countries, including the Vatican, have released top-secret papers discussing extraterrestrial incidents on Earth over many years. The U.S. has not participated in disclosure yet. We work with specific ETI from a contiguous universe. They are nonviolent and in complete obedience to God. Our ETI's connection to zero-point energy is obvious, that their purpose is to guide Edgar's international Quantrix science team to apply their zero-point energy research for humanity, to move away from the use of fossil fuels, which are so deleterious to our fragile planet," end quote. So that was a lot of words, but this email is stating that humans are interacting with extraterrestrial intelligence who come from another dimension or parallel reality. So that's also always constantly a question that people have, like, are these what we know as aliens? I keep saying aliens because saying extraterrestrial is very hard and weird in your mouth, but are these aliens, or what we know of as aliens, or think we know of as aliens, are they from another planet in our universe, or are they from a completely different dimension or parallel reality? That is a question that a lot of people are asking. Even still, now we're hearing it from members of Congress where they're like, yeah, there's something out there. We just don't know where it's from or what it is. And Mitchell's email is saying that these non-human intelligence forms, they're connected to zero-point energy, and they understand and use advanced systems, and they're trying to guide humankind and human researchers to develop similar technology for the sake of the planet Earth. So zero-point energy is basically, I guess, a clean form of energy. It's the tiny amount of energy that still exists in empty space, even when everything is as cold and inactive as possible. And Edgar Mitchell, along with others, have suggested that if zero-point energy could be controlled, it might provide massive clean energy that could power the world, power space travel, including advanced propulsion systems, like the rockets that take astronauts to the moon. It's worth noting that John Podesta did not ignore Edgar Mitchell. He didn't dismiss him. He didn't, act like he was crazy. He was very open to talking with Mitchell about these ideas and theories. So how does this tie back to General McCasland? Because it does. Because we also see in the leaked emails that an invitation was sent to McCasland by John Podesta, a meeting scheduled for Monday, January 25th, 2016. And CC'd on that email was somebody named Tom DeLonge, who we're going to talk about, and someone else named Rob Weiss. Rob Weiss was the executive vice president and general manager of Lockheed Martin. Actually, Lockheed Martin's advanced development program, Skunk Works. Also CC'd on that email was Major General Carey, an Air Force general who was relieved of command of the 20th Air Force in 2013 after a misconduct incident during a U.S.-Russia nuclear security exercise. Okay, now here's what's important to also notice is that General William McCasland's wife, Susan Wilkerson, she also received this invitation from John Podesta about this meeting. And she responded to the Podesta meeting, which was about UAP disclosure, from her own email address. What I'm trying to show you is Susan in her own right was considered somebody who would have access to top secret government information, somebody who had a brilliant enough mind to understand things, had something to offer to the conversation. She was not lumped in to General McCasland's invitation. Susan was also, it appears to be, involved in some way in higher levels of government and military and invited to talk about things like aliens. Okay? So who's Tom DeLonge? Because I mentioned that he was also CC'd on that email. In 2017, Tom DeLonge launched the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, whose mission it was to bring together former government officials, scientists, and intelligence figures to study UAPs, also to develop advanced technology and push for disclosure. So in late 2017, To the Stars Academy released 3 U.S. Navy UAP videos. All of the videos came from U.S. Navy aircraft systems. The first was taken in 2004, and it's known as FLIR, and it shows a white oval-shaped object with no wings and no visible propulsion. Pilot David Fravor, who, remember, I said he testified in front of Congress, he said the object dropped from high altitude to sea level instantly. It moved erratically, and it reacted to Fravor's own movements because Fravor was flying a plane. In 2015, the gimbal video was taken, and it shows a dark object in infrared that appears to rotate or tilt midair.
Dude, there's a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My God. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS, though, is it? It's not. It is the LNS, yeah. Well, if there's like another thing, it's rotating.
Another video taken in 2015 is called Go Fast, and it shows a small object moving very, very fast over the ocean.
Nickel pick one thing of Roger, Roger. Oh, Johnny! Woohoo! Roger, they're shooting to Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto charge. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Oh, let's fly!
These 3 videos were later confirmed as being authentic by the Pentagon. So the Pentagon confirmed, yes, that came from our, Air Force or our Navy planes. And yes, these videos are not doctored or edited. These are real. And that's the moment that Tom DeLonge became a serious figure in the UAP conversation. But who was Tom DeLonge before that, right? Because weird, he pops up out of nowhere. Actually, he co-founded the band Blink-182 in the early 1990s. He achieved massive success with that band, became a mainstream celebrity. But even then, Tom DeLonge was obsessed with UFOs. In the early 2000s, his interest deepened as he began doing more reading, more researching, and he started expressing his belief that governments were hiding advanced aerospace technology. In 2006, Tom DeLonge actually formed another band, Angels and Airwaves. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it slaps. The music actually showed Tom's evolution and his way that he was changing how he thought. It was more space-themed and deeper and existential. It's very cool. So at that time, Tom DeLonge began expressing that he felt UFOs were not just random flying objects in the air or strange things that people sometimes thought they saw. He felt that, extraterrestrials, UAPs, they were something that had been interacting with humanity over long periods of time and may be influencing us in deeper ways. Now, around 2013, 2014, Tom DeLonge began reaching out to people in military and intelligence, people who had contacts and connections in aerospace. And in 2015, he left Blink-182 to focus more on UFO research and disclosure. And then in 2015 and 2016, Tom DeLonge claims he met with Pentagon officials, intelligence personnel, and aerospace figures.
Hillary Clinton was running for presidency against, I guess it was against Trump, and John Podesta was her campaign manager.
Okay.
At the time, he was also senior advisor to Obama. So I was holding conversations with Podesta to get to Obama, and I had 2 multi-star generals from Space Command and the head of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, that Skunk Works built Area 51, their elite engineering division. I had them all on this like fucking emails, and we're setting up these conference calls and stuff. Well, Hillary Clinton's campaign got hacked by the Russians, WikiLeaks, and it outed all this shit about Podesta and her. And what happened with that was when all these news journalists were pouring through WikiLeaks to see what spilled from Hillary's campaign, they found these fucking emails with me and Podesta talking to these generals about UFOs. So Wall Street Journal threw that onto the Wall Street Journal. And then I was like, fuck, I'm fucked. And I'm like out there like fucking erasing computers and doing all this different, I didn't know what to do. And at that time, all these other government people that came out.
Okay, so you heard Tom DeLonge say he was talking to 2 multi-star generals and the head of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. And for a while, everyone was kind of like, oh, that Tom DeLonge guy is full of shit. Like, the head of Skunk Works isn't going to talk to him. These, legitimate generals aren't going to talk to him. But the Podesta emails not only prove this, but also kind of start the story and the narrative that one of those generals was William McCasland, which by this point, there's no doubt that it was. There's no doubt that Tom DeLonge, who was pushing for UAP disclosure and trying to find out more about, extraterrestrial life and what the government's hiding, there's no doubt that Tom DeLonge was working with and had talked to General William McCasland. So let's now go to a 2017 interview between Tom DeLonge and George Knapp of Coast to Coast AM. So in this article, Tom said that he had an opportunity to go to an event. He said, quote, the most classified and the most advanced group of engineers and scientists that work within the military-industrial complex work under one specific group. And it's a very, very quiet group. But for the first time, they were doing an event where family members can come and not go in the buildings, but at least celebrate in the parking lot what their loved ones do during the day. And they asked me, would you come up? And because I knew this one individual that had told me to be really careful, he goes, hey, look, this is a way for you to come up and see a little bit about what we're doing. And I said, oh my God, I would love to. And he said, do you want to come and introduce the head of the company to the crowd? And I said, I will if I get to sit with him for 5 minutes. I don't know why I said that. I just knew that this was an opportunity that guys like me would kill for because I knew exactly who this group of engineers were. I knew exactly what they do. So in this article, in the passage I just read you, Tom DeLonge is talking about Skunk Works, right? The secretive elite division of Lockheed Martin. The ones that design and build some of the most advanced and often classified aircraft and technologies in the world. So apparently, whoever was talking to Tom and asking, do you want to introduce the head of the company? And Tom was like, yeah, I get 5 minutes with him. This guy was like, you can't talk about UFOs. Like, if that's what you're planning to do, because Tom DeLonge's probably like me and everybody knows he can't be in, civil society because we'll start talking about UFOs and the Epstein files. He's like, you can't do it. You'll get kicked out. Now, Tom says that he does talk to the head guy and he has to go through all this advanced, 4 layers of security. And then they're in a room and they're talking. And one person apparently did a bunch of research on Tom and knew that he was into that subject. So halfway through the conversation, this person says, quote, so what about all the conspiracy stuff that you're into? End quote. And Tom says now he's being eyeballed by 3 very important people. And he's totally, caught at this point. And he's like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? So he tried to talk his way out of it. And then in comes the head of the company, the big dude. Tom says that when the guy comes in, he feels like this is his opportunity to kind of bring up UFOs and aliens, even though he was told not to. And he told the head guy, oh, you came in at a very interesting part of the conversation. This person brought up the whole UFO issue with me. I just want you to know that I don't plan on treating that disrespectfully with this project. Because Tom DeLonge of To the Stars Academy and Skunk Works are at this point in talks about doing some project, which will later come to find out, according to Skunk Works, it was possibly a documentary. And Tom's like, I'm not going to be, treating that disrespectfully with this project. And the head guy says, quote, we cannot be involved with anything that has anything to do with that subject, especially since there has been absolutely no evidence whatsoever that it exists. End quote. And Tom's like, man, that killed me. I'm cut off right there. My heart's racing. And I'm like, what do I do? Okay, so Skunk Works, like I said, has confirmed Tom DeLonge's connection to them. In a statement that they gave to the War Zone, they said, quote, Tom DeLonge reached out to Skunk Works with interest in collaborating on a documentary focused on secret machines and advanced development projects. Multiple members of the Skunk Works team met with DeLonge to explore his vision for the documentary, as we would with any individual or organization interested in telling the story of Skunk Works and the technologies we've developed. We ultimately decided to not move forward with our participation in the documentary. During this exploration period, DeLonge attended a Skunk Works employee event, end quote. So basically everything Tom DeLonge is saying is true. He went to an employee event. He got to sit down with the head guy of Skunk Works, as well as some other people. And when he brought up aliens, they were like, we're not going to move forward with this, right? That's fine. Maybe it's because they don't think that anything exists and they're like, hey, we don't want to be involved in some stupid conspiracy theory documentary. Fine. But apparently, Tom DeLonge was also included in a meeting with John Podesta, two generals, and the executive vice president and general manager of Skunk Works, Rob Weiss, who was in that position from 2013 to 2018. So at the time that he would have met with Tom DeLonge in 2016, Rob Weiss was in charge of Skunk Works. Ironically, and as these things go, Skunk Works just popped back into the news as I was writing this. It was reported that the CIA used a futuristic new secret technology called Ghost Murmur to find and rescue the second American airman who was shot down in southern Iran. This just happened. Ghost Murmur, who's ever heard of it, right? Apparently, this is the first time they've used it. I don't know if I believe that. But anyways, Ghost Murmur, it detects the electromagnetic signature of a human heartbeat from long distances away, in this case, 40 miles away. And this system uses quantum magnetometry with artificial intelligence to separate the pulse from the environmental noise, the background noise. A source familiar with the operation, probably somebody who works for Skunk Works, allegedly, just my opinion, but if you're familiar with the operation, you're either in, military or you work for the company that made Ghost Murmur. They told the New York Post, quote, it's like hearing a voice in a stadium, except the stadium is 1,000 square miles of desert. In the right conditions, if your heart is beating, we will find you. The name is deliberate. Murmur is a clinical term for a heart rhythm. Ghost refers to finding someone who, for all practical purposes, has disappeared, end quote. I don't like General McCasland, somebody who just disappeared in like a desert area like General McCasland. Ghost Murmur was developed by Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, and it has been reported that the desert terrain around the crash site for the guy shot down in Iran, it offered ideal conditions for the Ghost Murmur. Low electromagnetic interference, minimal human activity, and the contrast between a living body and the cool desert floor at night. And this provided multiple layers of confirmation so they could find and save this person. But they can't find a retired Air Force general who wandered off in New Mexico, technically the same desert terrain that offers ideal conditions for Ghost Murmur, And once again, if you think that it's not a matter of national security to make sure General McCasland is found and hasn't fallen into the wrong hands, you would be wrong. He knows a lot. He would be very important to some people, or maybe some non-human people. I don't know. So after his meeting at Skunk Works and with Skunk Works, DeLonge claims to have met with top officials at NASA, the Air Force, the U.S. intelligence apparatus, and high-ranking U.S. political figures who helped him put together a team of highly qualified and deeply connected government insiders that would basically help him with To the Stars Academy and direct the efforts of To the Stars Academy, and then supply Tom with information, right? Like inside information. So in July of 2016, this would be about, 6 months after that January 2016 email where John Podesta's putting together all of these people, DeLonge talked about having a meeting with someone he referred to as the general, right? And the general, he talks about the general a lot. It has by now been confirmed that when he's talking about the general, he's referring to General William McCasland, who just walked away from his house and disappeared a few months ago. So Tom's going and flying somewhere to meet the general. And he says, quote, I landed on the tarmac, walked off the plane, and met a smart and fit man in his 60s. Never seen a multi-star general before, let alone talked to one. He led me to a table in the back of a large room. He leaned across the table and said, it was the Cold War. And we lived under the very real threat of nuclear war every day. And somewhere in those years, we found a life form. I said, sir, I need help telling young adults this story. He said, what do you need? Advisors, I responded. I need high-ranking advisors in the military, intelligence, and DOD to help guide me. So I was given 10 advisors, each with knowledge in different areas that pertain to UFOs and the very real national security issues associated with them, end quote. Now, like I said, this definitely was General McCasland. Tom is saying that General McCasland helped introduce him to people who eventually he would get this information from and help guide the To the Stars mission. Tom describes this general as a person who has multiple PhDs. Tom says in the interview, I wish I could tell you who he is and what. And then he says, there was nobody above him. There's nobody, maybe a couple. But when you look at the divisions of how the Department of Defense works, in this specific division, it's just extraordinary that I have this contact. So I started using that as much as I could. He says that after the general told him they found a life form, he said, quote, everything that we did and every decision that we made with that life form was because of the consciousness at that time, end quote, which is the Cold War. Now, the reason we know that Tom DeLonge was definitely talking to and about General McCasland every time he refers to the person he calls the general. We know this because in the Podesta emails, Tom DeLonge told John Podesta that he believed the government had recovered alien technology and that there were classified aerospace programs studying it. And he also said outright that he was working with General McCasland, who was, quote, in charge of all that stuff, end quote. In his interview with George Knapp in 2016, Tom DeLonge stated, quote, when you're meeting with these people within government and you understand what the subject's about, you kind of really have a respect for the enormity on their shoulders and what they're dealing with. And so I was really humble about what my asks were. I was really respectful about security programs and their security clearances and their classified programs. So I really know how to navigate, like not getting them in trouble, but creating a framework of how we can push the ball down the field. And I always delivered on what I said I would do. And I was always willing to learn a better way of doing it. The first few I sat with, my heart was pounding and I was shaking, but I had to pretend I wasn't, because it's one thing to think something's real, and it's another to sit with somebody that has stars on their shoulders saying, this is absolutely real, and you don't know the stakes, end quote. Now, of course, General McCasland, I believe he was a 2-star general. When he's talking about stars on his shoulders, he's saying, I'm sitting down with a general who has 2 stars on his shoulders, or stars on his shoulders. Now, this might all sound crazy, but it is now pretty much considered a fact that General William Neil McCasland worked with Tom DeLonge, whose main focus was not only disclosing that there is life out there in the universe outside of us, but also researching and developing advanced technology. In fact, Tom and the To the Stars Academy claim they have some sort of like extraterrestrial spacecraft that they're working on and trying to replicate, but that's a story for another day. And McCasland was someone who, as we have discussed, had top secret access to multiple government and military programs centered around space, satellites, advanced weaponry, advanced technology. General McCasland vanished into thin air 6 days after Donald Trump announced that he would be trying to release files pertaining to UFOs and aliens. Just last week, it might be 2 weeks ago when you're seeing this, but just last week when I'm filming this, Congressman Tim Burchett was asked about General McCasland's disappearance, as well as the disappearances and deaths of other high-profile individuals. And here's what he had to say.
Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett is joining us. He's also a member of the Oversight and Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, good to see you. What do you think's going on here?
Well, I don't know exactly. I just know there are no coincidences in this town. These folks have disappeared or died mysteriously, and there's the only thing that ties them together is the fact that they worked on things that are dealing with outer space, whether it's UFOs or nuclear secrets or missiles or what have you. But I think we need full disclosure. When I'm in a meeting, in a closed door meeting, and I asked about the president's points on these, and then I'm told by some arrogant, unelected bureaucrat that the president is on a need-to-know basis. I think that says everything it needs to be said about what's going on. I think there's an arrogance, there's an underlying, and I talked to the president about this. I said, it's just layers of the onion, Mr. President. You peel one off, and there's another one underneath. You put your top people in, and it's just too much to clear out in 4 years, and it's just... We've got a real problem, I think, in this area, and I think you've got some arrogance. When I sit in a meeting and some little punk with a man bun is sort of running the show, and you have decorated military officers in the meeting there that are basically unallowed to say anything, and you can read their faces or what's going on.
Well, General McCasland, he was not a minor player at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He was there for more than 35 years. At one point, he was the top guy at that base, and he just disappears. His family has no idea what happened. Do you think the cases are connected, or do you think this is just some absolutely wild coincidence? Because all four of these people are also connected in some way.
Yeah, I think some of them could be a domestic issue, but I think overall, I think there is a connection there.
Okay,
And
so you do think this is a conspiracy?
We're ever going to know, because it'll come out, and it gives enough time for the trail to go. You know, it's like when a kid in Washington D.C. gets they find him dead, and they claim that he was mugged, yet his watch and wallet and he's got cash on him are not taken. But that's just the story that's put out, and that's what we believe. So
yeah,
I just do not believe this is by coincidence.
And people just do not disappear. And the connections between all four of these people, people just don't.
Not in this day and age. No, yeah. You've got to have some real inside type of operation.
So we will come back to General McCasland. We have to, because he's connected to our next story. But now let's switch gears and talk about Monica Raza, who disappeared 8 months before General McCasland disappeared. 60-year-old Monica Raza was last seen on June 22nd, 2025, while she was hiking with two experienced companions on the popular Mount Waterman Trail in the Angeles National Forest.
To developing news tonight, the search is on for a 60-year-old woman missing in the Angeles National Forest. Monica Raza was last seen near Mount Waterman yesterday at about 9 a.m.
Well, the LA County Sheriff Department's Crescenta Valley Station and Montrose Search and Rescue have been working around the clock on this one. They say Air Rescue 5 and search and rescue teams from LA, San Diego, Ventura, Riverside, and soon Orange and San Bernardino counties are all out searching.
The circumstances of Monica's disappearance are quite odd, I must say, okay? Very, very odd. In fact, way more odd than General McCasland's disappearance, even though it's not odd that he disappeared based on what he knew, but I'm saying it doesn't add up. I don't know how she just vanished like this. I also want to say that there are amazing and smart people all over the internet. And there's this forum called, I think it's Spartan, and it appears to be, a pretty niche hiking and outdoor forum focused on the San Gabriel Mountains and surrounding areas. So these people talk about all sorts of stuff related to hiking, the trails, the terrain, the area, tips, tricks, etc. And recently they've been talking about Monica's disappearance. So a user called RH posted a timeline based on statements and metadata from pictures that Monica and the other hikers took that day. So RH refers to Monica and the other two hikers as A, the lead hiker, B, Monica, and C, the third hiker. So according to this timeline, Monica, along with hiker A and C, departed the 6,000-foot day-use trailhead on Angeles Crest Highway at approximately 6:30 a.m. that day. Apparently, they all carpooled to this area. Monica's car was left behind at someone else's house back in the city. The three started the hike, but at the bottom of a steep section, about 1.2 miles from where they started, one of the hikers, hiker C, stopped because the hike was getting too tough. So this was around 7:15 a.m. Hiker C decided to remain where they were, leaving just Monica and hiker A to continue on to the summit of Mount Waterman, which they reached at around 8:15 a.m. after hiking for about another 1.6 miles. So this is a photograph of Monica Raza before she went missing. It's believed the photo was taken at the summit. At 8:40 a.m., Monica and hiker A start going back down the trail. Apparently they were running or jogging. And after about a mile, they encountered another couple of people that were going uphill near Double Delight Peak. They exchanged greetings. Everyone moved on. This happened at 9 a.m. And at 9:01 a.m., a picture was taken of Monica. And the metadata shows the picture was taken near Double Delight Peak. So a minute later, another picture of Monica was taken, and that metadata shows that it was about 70 feet from the location of the previous photo. Monica's last known location at 9:07 a.m. was about 422 meters, or roughly 0.26 miles from the location of the photo taken at 9:02 a.m. An extremely short distance, by the way, approximately a 4 to 5 minute walk. So hiker A reported that they were approaching a northbound right turn on the ridge. He yelled back to Monica to let her know that there was a turn coming up. She acknowledged him by nodding and waving. And at first, hiker A said that when he turned to yell to Monica, she was 30 yards behind him. He since changed that distance and clarified that she was only 30 feet behind him. And that's pretty close. Like, I don't know if you would necessarily have to yell out to a person who was only 30 feet behind you, but that's what he said. So hiker A, he makes the right turn. He said he descended about 150 feet, and then he realized Monica was no longer behind him. So at 9:12 a.m., hiker A waited on the trail for Monica for about 5 minutes before returning to where he had last seen her, but Monica was nowhere to be found. At this point, he started calling her name, and allegedly, hiker C, who was at that time about 1,600 feet away from hiker A and 500 feet below the ridgeline, he could hear hiker A calling out Monica's name. Now, Monica, who could not have gotten far in the space of roughly 10 minutes, let's be honest, she would also have been able to hear if someone was calling out her name, right? If she was able to respond. So what the hell happened to Monica, and where the hell was she, and where the hell is she now? So hiker A said he called out Monica's name. She doesn't answer. He looked around for Monica. He said he searched 200 yards west on the ridge and 120 feet south of her last known location. By 9:40 a.m., hiker A had returned to hiker C at the bottom of the steep section of trail, and then hiker A and hiker C either started walking back to the car or looking around for Monica. That's unclear. But then they ran into another group of hikers, and one of them happened to be a former search and rescue member. So these hikers, along with hiker A, they go back up to where Monica was last seen. Hiker C stayed at the bottom of the steep section of trail. So actually, I would say that probably hiker A and hiker C did not look around for Monica, because hiker A went back down to hiker C. And the reason hiker C wasn't even with them to begin with was because the trail was too hard for that person. So yeah, I would say they probably just started walking back to the car. I'm not sure. But then they ended up back at the bottom part of the trail, like the section of the trail where hiker C was waiting the whole time. But either way, at 10 a.m., hiker A and the other hikers are searching for Monica around the ridge. They do this for 30 minutes. And at that point, I don't know what the hell hiker C is doing, but the former search and rescue member told hiker A, return to the car, trigger an SOS signal. Hiker A does that at 10:53 a.m. At 11:15 a.m., hiker C and hiker A, they flag down a sheriff's deputy who happens to be driving by, and by noon, the first official search and rescue members arrived on the scene. By 12:30, search and rescue was on the trails searching for Monica. Around 1:30, air searches began with a helicopter, and then there was 2 hikers who were returning from Twin Peaks, and they would later report that at around 2:30 p.m., they heard what sounded like a female yelling out in anguish or despair, not calling out for help necessarily. They just said, like, yelling out in anguish and despair. And this was reportedly around the Twin Peaks saddle area. The coordinates of that area is only about 1,600 feet from Monica's last known location, just under a third of a mile, roughly 5 to 6 minute walk. So was that Monica? Some people say it was like maybe a coyote. I guess they scream. I'm not a wilderness person, so I couldn't tell you, but apparently sometimes coyotes scream and it sounds like a woman screaming. But don't you think people out there hiking would know the difference? But if that was Monica, why was she able to shout out then, but not when hiker A was calling her name? And what was she shouting out about? And where the heck was she? Because, like I said, the place where they said they heard the scream was not far from where her last known location was, just like a 5 to 6 minute walk. So Monica Raza was an experienced hiker. She hiked that specific area all the time, weekly, some reports have stated, and she simply vanished and no one has seen her since. She was last seen 30 feet behind her friend, and she was out of his sight for 10 minutes tops. What the hell happened here? So acting Captain Ryan A. Vienna of the LA County Sheriff's Office reported that they had pulled out all the stops to help find Monica. And they really did. They brought in Montrose Search and Rescue. Search and Rescue was joined by units from Altadena, Antelope Valley, Antelope Valley, we're going to talk about that, but Malibu, San Dimas, Sierra Madre, San Diego, Ventura County, Orange County, San Bernardino County, Riverside. Vienna also thanked their federal partners for the assistance that they provided, although he didn't name those federal partners. So apparently, probably the FBI, right? But he's thanking federal partners because Monica is somebody who's important, just like General McCasland was. They had helicopters up there running thermal imaging sweeps, looking in the woods in the wilderness for body signatures. They used forward-looking infrared cameras the following morning. They did find a bear, but no sign of Monica Raza. They even ran an algorithmic pixel matching program through the aerial photography equipment, and this was calibrated specifically to pick up the red in Monica's shirt. Now, this technology did flag some targets, but each time searchers went to that area, they found Mylar balloons. And at first I was like, all the searchers found Mylar balloons? This is suspicious. Who's leaving behind Mylar balloons for these people? Because that's where my brain goes. But I always look into things, and I guess this is actually a pretty common thing because in this forum, these people were saying they're always finding Mylar balloons. And when I looked it up, it was like, yeah, this happens all the time. Mylar balloons are like foil. They're filled with helium. They can drift miles, even dozens of miles from where they were released, and they often end up in remote areas where search and rescue searches take place because they get caught up in like trees and stuff. So that was common. Nobody was leaving balloons behind for the searchers. So on the morning of June 23rd, so the following morning, a beanie belonging to Monica was found in a steep ravine south of the ridge she was last seen on, descending downwards towards Devil's Canyon. That name is very interesting. So the location is very close to where Monica was last seen, roughly 210 meters, about the length of 2 football fields, a walking distance of 2 to 3 minutes from where she was last seen. Now, reportedly, scent dogs tracked Monica's scent from the upper ridge into the ravine, but then lost her scent completely. But according to a poster, Mario V, on Espartian, they had talked. Mario said he had talked to Hiker A, and Hiker A claimed the beanie was located by a search and rescue member, and then a scent dog was brought into the ravine to establish Monica's scent, but the dog was not able to pick up her scent at that location. Was the dog able to pick up her scent from the beanie? Was it Monica's beanie? I know we see her with it in pictures, but was it Monica's beanie? Because the dog goes and gets the scent off the beanie or goes to the area in the ravine where the beanie was, can't pick up the scent. So there's no like exit or entry point. So if Monica went into the ravine and didn't go out, where the hell is she? Now, this same poster, Mario, also said, quote, "I did descend down that ravine, and it was a sketchy terrain with a loose and steep slope. I don't see how Monica thought that was the right way to the parking lot and kept blindly descending instead of stopping and returning to the ridge to reorient herself. I also wonder why she would not call out for her partner and why she would not hear her partner's calls. Supposedly, he was back at the ridge in less than 10 minutes since last seeing her, and I can't imagine she descended too far down that ravine in those 10 minutes. Strange." End quote. My opinion, Monica was never in that ravine, okay? Because exactly, she would have heard people calling out for her. If she was not incapacitated in some way within moments of Hiker A last seeing her, she would have still been close enough to hear people calling out for her or to call for help. What's going on here? Strange indeed, Mario V. Very strange. So volunteers and authorities searched this area for months using every available resource. They have never found a single sign of Monica Raza except for that random beanie that somehow ended up in the ravine without her scent. Don't know, but understand, once again, Monica was an experienced hiker. She lived in that area. She had hiked those trails before. Why would she hear her friend 30 feet ahead of her be like, hey, there's a turn right here? And Monica's like, okay, great. And then she's like, I think I'll go in a ravine. No, it doesn't make any sense. So who is Monica Raza and why are we talking about her? Well, as it turns out, she has ties to General McCasland. She has ties to the U.S. government, to the U.S. military, and she created something that is very valuable to the U.S. government and military. Monica was a materials scientist and aerospace engineer who worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the JPL. So the JPL is a federally funded research lab. It's run by NASA, but managed by the California Institute of Technology, Caltech. So the JPL the Jet Propulsion Lab, and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base are tightly linked, and they often collaborate on critical aerospace research. Now, Monica Raza was a brilliant human, right? She did a lot of things in her life and throughout her career. She graduated from Columbia University with a bachelor's degree in metallurgical engineering, which is like metals and stuff. And she started working at a company called Aerojet Rocketdyne in 1988. Aerojet Rocketdyne would end up being the ones who were kind of on the case to solve this huge problem for the United States, and they could not have done it without something called Mandaloy. So Mandaloy is a nickel-based super alloy that can withstand super intense high temperatures and pressure. And it does this without being set on fire itself or cracking. And this is important because the U.S. didn't really have that technology before, and it was Monica and her colleague, Dallas Hardwick, who invented the super alloy in the mid-1990s. In 1999, both NASA and the Air Force Research Lab, which, remember, was run by General McCasland, they began funding Mandaloy because, of course, this super alloy would have applications for everything important, both space travel and military. Now, Dallas Hardwick, who was technically Monica's mentor, she would go on to work at the Air Force Research Lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base until she retired in 2012. General McCasland took command of the Air Force Research Lab in May of 2011, at which point Dallas Hardwick was one of his senior scientists. But also remember, McCasland was the material wing director at the Air Force Research Lab and commander of Phillips Research Site at Kirtland Air Force Base from 2001 to 2004, which would directly pertain to Monica's research, all of it. All of it would. Okay, so according to a press release from the Air Force in 2016, quote, the U.S. Air Force Research Lab and contractor Aerojet Rocketdyne achieved a major milestone under the Hydrocarbon Boost Program, which is advanced domestic rocket engine technologies in support of next-generation launch systems, end quote. This same press release attributed the major milestone to the first use of Mandaloy 2000 super alloy, which was co-developed by Rocketdyne and the AFRL Materials Directorate, which was co-developed by Aerojet Rocketdyne and the Air Force Research Laboratory Materials Directorate, which is what General McCasland was in charge of, and that's also where Dallas Hardwick went to work after. This was the laboratory that funded this superalloy, Mandaloy's evolution into something that would, as I said, solve a huge problem for the United States government. That's why so much money was being put into it, billions of dollars, specifically into the creation of an engine for a rocket ship, the AR-1. That was kind of the birth of why they were trying to find this metal. So to understand why Aerojet Rocketdyne's AR-1 engine is so important, we have to talk about the RD-180. This is a Russian-built rocket engine developed in the 1990s. And this is the engine that the United States used for a very long time in their rocket ships and to power their satellites and stuff, right? And you might say, why is the United States using Russian rocket engines to power like the satellites that are carrying their national intelligence and, you know, all the sensitive information? Well, it's an interesting story because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that country's entire state-funded scientific system basically imploded overnight, right? So that meant thousands of very smart people with a lot of information were out of a job. You know, thousands of rocket engineers, nuclear physicists, weapons designers who were sitting on some of the most advanced military knowledge and technology in the world, they were no longer getting a paycheck. So to the United States, this was a nightmare scenario because they knew there was a very real chance that because these people didn't have a job and weren't getting paid, they could be recruited by Iran, North Korea, China, not just for rocket engines, but for ballistic missile programs and nuclear delivery systems. So the United States actually helped fund and support programs to keep former Soviet scientists in Russia and employed. Basically, like, we'll keep you in your home, we will put money in your pocket, please don't go over to China or Iran or North Korea, please don't do it. One of these projects that the United States funded was the RD-180, a rocket engine that could operate at extreme pressure and use oxygen-rich pre-burners successfully, a rocket engine that the United States had not and could not figure out how to build. So why? It feels like it should be, we have engines that, send rockets into space and stuff. We have since the 60s and 70s, right? We did like missions with NASA. Yes, but not one like this. Not an engine that could go so far and so fast, so efficiently. So think of a rocket engine like a controlled explosion in a metal tube. The more pressure inside, the more powerful the thrust, which means the rocket can obviously not only lift more weight, but it uses fuel more efficiently. Fuel is important. So the Soviets basically said, hey, let's crank up the pressure in our rocket engines as high as possible so that they're the best ever. But usually there'd be an issue with high pressure, because that means more heat, more force, more stress on the engine. And this causes most engines to crack, melt, explode, malfunction. Now you add in the oxygen-rich preburners, which once again makes the rockets way more efficient, use less fuel, but the United States wasn't using those because it's also very dangerous. Because when you're running super hot, high-pressure oxygen through metal components, that oxygen will literally eat the metal and cause it to burn from the inside, which isn't what you want in an engine that's powering a rocket going into space. So the United States couldn't make this type of rocket engine, a better, more efficient engine, because they had not figured out how to make a metal that didn't melt at these high temperatures. Russia figured out how to use materials that didn't burn easily in oxygen. They figured out how to keep everything cool enough to not melt and design the engine so that it didn't destroy itself. Well, we didn't know how to do that. So because the U.S. didn't know how to do that, and because they wanted to make sure that all of that Russian brain power didn't fall into the wrong hands, they decided, let's team up with Russia, right? Everybody's going to be happy. Lockheed Martin licensed the RD-180. The engines were built in Russia and then imported to the U.S. And the engine was first used in 2002 for the Atlas rocket. So for the following 2 decades, the RD-180 powered launches of spy satellites, military communications, satellites, GPS satellites, NASA science missions, basically everything that was critical to the United States, national security, and like space exploration, like science and being able to keep up with other countries, which meant we depended on these Russian rocket engines for national safety and defense and to also keep up with the world stage, which is a big deal, right, for all these countries. That's why the whole space race happened, and that's why the whole nuclear weapons things happened. We all have to make sure that nobody has better stuff than us, and nobody's smarter than us, and nobody's doing things that we also can't do or didn't do first. It's a huge pissing contest always, but it's very, very, very important to the heads and the people in charge of all these countries. It's very important. I think it's stupid. I understand why they feel this way. I understand why they're going to sort of make us feel like they have to do it, but I think it's stupid. So working with Russia and having them build the engines for our rockets and everything, this strategy worked at first. So for a while, after the Cold War, U.S. and Russia relations were okay. They were relatively cooperative and stable, and everyone was getting what they wanted. But the entire thing depended on the assumption that Russia would stay a stable and cooperative partner, which we know they didn't, because then in 2014, Russia took territory from Ukraine using military force. And then the U.S. and the UN were like, oh man, why'd you have to, you can't do that. You can't do that. Why'd you have to do that? So it changed the borders in Europe. It challenged the post-Cold War order. We put sanctions on Russia. Russia got mad, and their deputy prime minister announced that Russia would ban the U.S. from using Russian-made rocket engines for military launches. So enter Aerojet Rocketdyne, who in 2014 lobbied the U.S. government to fund an all-new U.S.-sourced rocket propulsion system that would replace the Russian RD-180. Rocketdyne said they believed they could build this engine and they could do it in a way that would be more affordable. They created an engine called the AR-1, and they were like, listen, we're going to make this engine, and we're just going to swap the RD-180 out of the Atlas rocket, and that way we don't have to build a whole new rocket, right? Because these rockets are designed around the engines that are built for them. And the whole problem with Russia being like, you can't use our engines anymore, and we're going to stop selling them to you, and we're going to stop giving them to you, was that we had all these rockets designed around these engines. So if something happened to the engines, we wouldn't be able to replace them, and then that rocket would be basically useless. So Aerojet Rocketdyne was like, we can fix this problem. We don't have to build a whole new rocket. It'll be cheap. We'll just make an engine that like kind of fits in the same way, and we'll make it better. And so we can do this for you. And basically at that time, Aerojet Rocketdyne was already deeply intertwined with the U.S. government. They'd already built engines for NASA and the military and had multiple government contracts. Now, inevitably, as the story goes, which is why I laughed when they said they could do it for cheap, it wasn't actually that cheap. It would require significant government funding. It was going to take years to develop. And at that time, we didn't have years because we were about to be engineless in our rocket ships. So the government ended up going in a different direction. Competitors convinced them to go bigger. They were like, hey, screw swapping out these engines. That's small time thinking. You should spend billions to build new rockets, which is what we ended up doing. The United States ended up building some new rockets. But don't get me wrong, they were still trying to figure out a way that they could use the old rockets with new engines. So they got multiple things going on. They got multiple irons in the fire right now. Now we know that the Air Force and NASA were pouring money into the research and development of this super alloy, Mandaloy, right? What Monica Raza created. Actually, the Mon in Mandaloy stands for Monica. So in 2017, Space News put out an article where they interviewed Monica Raza about Mandaloy. And the article states that Aerojet Rocketdyne relies on Mandaloy for key components of their AR-1 engine, as well as other engines, by the way. And it says that Aerojet Rocketdyne plans to deliver this engine to the Air Force for qualification in 2019. Now, in this article, Monica states, quote, because Mandaloy is a family of alloys, I worked with the Air Force to scale up production, look at different processing methods, and get the material ready for insertion into a rocket engine, end quote. She also said that the AR-1 engine, which remember, is the United States and Aerojet Rocketdyne's kind of replacement for the RD-180, the Russian engine. She said the AR-1 has 12 different components made out of Mandaloy. It was used in most of the components that would be exposed to hot gaseous oxygen, such as the preburner, turbine rotor, turbine housing, duct lines, hot gas manifold, a lot of components. Basically, this engine probably wouldn't work as well and be as efficient and be as good without Mandaloy. So Monica said that Mandaloy helped meet affordability goals. The alloy was developed in-house and had the needed characteristics of being compatible with the high pressure, high temperature oxygen, and it has high strength. It also allows them to avoid the use of coatings, which makes the rocket less heavy, which obviously makes it more fuel efficient. You know, they want to be not heavy. They don't want these rockets to be very heavy. That's what I found out from researching rockets and rocket engines. The main thing is they're like, how can we keep this as light as possible? So if the United States had decided to go a different direction, away from the AR-1, and they were like, okay, rocket, jet, Aerodyne, whatever, you keep trying to make that, but we're still going to build new rockets. If that was the case, then why were the Air Force and NASA still so interested in funding Mandaloy? Well, obviously, because they still want the engines to be made, but also because the super alloy wasn't just for AR-1. It wasn't just for the rocket engine. It's a foundational technology that can be used in all sorts of places, all sorts of things, hypersonic weapons, missile systems. The whole situation with Russia and the RD-180 had exposed an undeniable weakness for this country. We had, for some reason, not invested in the right science or technology, and we'd lost the ability to build certain high-performance engines. We had fallen behind, and you know, we don't like to fall behind. The government and military wanted to make sure we never fell behind again. So we still had some of the reliable RD-180 engines, by the way, because, like I said, we had all these rockets designed around those specific engines. And even though we didn't buy any more from Russia, the show had to go on. And by the way, we had developed a sort of tense agreement with Russia where they were still like helping us service those engines. But then Russia invaded Ukraine again. And in March of 22, the U.S. and their allies hit Russia with heavy sanctions again, and Russia's space agency said that that was over too. They would no longer service the engines. No more help troubleshooting issues, no more tech support in the middle of the night, no more engineering support, no more spare or replacement parts, completely cut off. And that was a big problem because those engines were being used for military satellites and intelligence missions. But remember, Mandaloy wouldn't just be an answer for rocket engines. The way it was made to withstand so much pressure and heat created endless possibilities for the people of NASA and the Air Force Research Lab, which was headed by General McCasland, who, remember, had a whole-ass materials and manufacturing directorate whose objective it was to develop and improve the materials and manufacturing methods needed to build the Air Force's most advanced systems, materials that are better, stronger, lighter, heat-resistant, materials that allow the United States to maintain technological superiority and enable next-generation weapons and systems, which is terrifying. As that 2016 Air Force press release stated, quote, "The DoD is absolutely committed to transitioning off the RD-180 as quickly as possible while ensuring no impacts to national security. Programs such as BPTM," that's an Aerojet Rocketdyne program, "are essential to achieving that objective while solidifying U.S. assured access to space and supporting the U.S.'s launch industry's viability in the global market." End quote. So that was said by Lieutenant General Samuel Graves, the SMC commander and Air Force Program Executive Officer for Space. So it sounds like Mandaloy is pretty important to me, right? It's very important to the government, the military, national security. And now the two people who held the patents on it are either dead or missing, which is weird. But, I'll talk about that in a second. Because remember, it was Monica and her mentor, Dallas Hardwick. By 2005, Dallas Hardwick was leading all materials research for advanced group turbine engines at the Air Force Research Laboratory Materials Directorate at Wright-Patterson. This was the exact place and the exact program that General McCasland was in charge of. Now, I also want to talk about the Sentinel Network. Check them out because they've done amazing work on these cases. They do online reporting. They've untwisted the web. They've been trying to decode things. And as they said, quote, "Monica Raza built the alloy at Aerojet Rocketdyne. Hardwick's team qualified it at Wright-Patterson. When McCasland took command of the Air Force Research Lab in May of 2011, Hardwick was still there. Raza's contracts were still active. All three of them were on the same program at the same time." End quote. The Sentinel goes on to report that until 2023, every public record listed Monica Raza as Monica Jacinto. So I believe that was her married name. And she was listed as a technical fellow at Aerojet Rocketdyne. In July of 2023, a company called L3 Harris acquired Aerojet for $4.7 billion. Whew, that's a lot of money. And then all of a sudden, after that, Monica is being referred to as Monica Raza of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and NASA. She was actually listed as that on the 2024-2025 Dean's Advisory Board at Caltech. So the Sentinel says, quote, "She moved from the defense contractor that builds the engines to the NASA lab that sits in the Crescenta Valley 30 miles down Angeles Crest Highway from the ridgeline where she vanished, under her family name rather than the professional name attached to her patents and publications," end quote. So JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, as we know, is a federally funded research and development center managed by Caltech for NASA. It builds planetary spacecraft, operates something called the Deep Space Network. The Deep Space Network is a global system of giant radio antennas used by NASA to communicate with spacecraft far beyond Earth. So an article in Science Daily from 2025 said that from this network of antennas and communication centers that's going out into deep space, we might accidentally be broadcasting our location and our existence to alien civilizations. Quote, "A new study shows that our deep space transmissions, especially those aimed at Mars and interplanetary spacecraft, spill over into space in detectable patterns. If extraterrestrial observers were aligned with a certain planetary position, they'd have a strong chance of catching our signals," end quote. I believe the actual study, because I read it, it said something like there was a 77% chance that if there was like aliens out there, we would be sending like huge messages like, "Here we are, we're over here." That is quite strong, 77%. Now, the article goes on to say that the finding suggests that by mirroring this logic, looking for exoplanet alignments and focusing on nearby star systems, we could boost our own search for alien technosignatures. And I know someone who was doing that, focusing on nearby star systems and looking for exoplanets. His name was Carl Grillmeyer, and he was shot dead on his front porch on February 16th, 2026 in California. Carl Grillmeyer also worked for Caltech and NASA, and if you choose to continue this journey with me, we will get there. So the Sentinel Network, they go on to point out that after Monica disappeared, there was no public statement from Aerojet Rocketdyne, which she worked for forever. She created like this super alloy that allowed them to, be the favorite child of the United States government and military. There was no public statement from NASA or the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is where she was working at the time of her disappearance. The Sentinel Network's article says, quote, the only signal from inside the system is a Reddit comment on the social hiking platform that says, quote, any updates on the search? I'm a JPLer and something is not right about this story. She needs to be found, end quote. Now, Monica's Mandaloy co-inventor, Dallas Hardwick, also quietly passed away in Dayton, Ohio on January 4th, 2014, after a stage 4 breast cancer diagnosis. Once again, no announcements or memorials were made. Dallas Hardwick was at that time still working remotely for the Air Force Research Lab at Wright-Patterson. She had helped create something that benefited her country and national security and the military so much. Space travel, right? She had been awarded the Meritorious Civilian Service Medal, but nothing, not even a mention of her death in her local paper, the Dayton Daily News. 4 days after Monica disappeared and 3 days before the official search was ended or suspended, someone created a memorial for Monica Raza on Find a Grave. So I will put it up here because now if you try to find it on the internet, it says that the link is no longer there. And it was created by somebody who identified themselves as Lillian, and their profile is no longer publicly accessible. But, we've got the Wayback Machine and we're able to find things. Once again, I'm sure the powers that be hate the Wayback Machine. This memorial stated that Monica Raza, born December 30th, 1964, died June 22nd, 2025, the day she went missing. It says death location, Angeles National Forest, Los Angeles County, California, USA. And the remains, it says green burial. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with what a green burial is. I only really am because I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about it before, and he says, that's the best way to be buried. But it basically means you're not embalmed, you're not prepared for burial, you're not put in like a coffin, you're just, your body is put in the earth, and then, the things happen to a body that happen after death, and you're biodegradable, you go back into the earth, ash to ashes, dust to dust, all of that. A green burial, very, very weird. So I don't know what happened. I don't know why somebody would do that, but it is very strange that really no one who knew Monica or worked with her throughout her very long and illustrious career in science and technology and all her achievements, no one made an officially nice memorial. And usually you'll see that with some of the other people that we talk about during this segment or this series when we talk about these missing and dead scientists. That was done for some of these people, that their colleagues who worked at the colleges or at the government entities with them would say, oh, so-and-so was such a good person, so smart, they were working on this project. Nothing for Monica. Now, one last comment on military weapons and how important they are to everything in the eyes of the government and all others, right? So these are weapons that are being created and probably are already created that we won't even hear about until they've been used for years, like lasers, for instance, which is something that General McCasland and the Air Force Research Lab were deeply invested in. The U.S. government has spent decades developing lasers, from early experiments to modern weapons. And the whole thing is they're driven by the goal of delivering precise, high-speed energy to targets, with recent technology finally making that practical, okay? That's what the government's website says. So Helios is the newest thing that we just heard about. It has been described as a 60-plus kilowatt class laser weapon system built by Lockheed Martin, extremely powerful, extremely cheap, right? Because launching a missile costs hundreds of millions of dollars. A laser shot costs under $1. So in mid-March of 2026, we heard the U.S. was deploying technology in the Iran war that would bring the cost of shooting a drone down from several million to just a few cents. And it was reported that the USS Preble, a Navy ship, had downed several Iranian drones with Helios, this laser system. We were then told the weapon system was going to be integrated into naval ships and amphibious craft as a defense against drone and missile attacks. And then Lockheed Martin said, also, by the way, the laser is scalable. Like the current architecture, the way it's built now, is capable of reaching 120 kilowatts. But it's not like we're using lasers to kill people, right? That would be crazy. That would be too like Star Wars-y. But get this, Lockheed Martin is developing laser weapons 5 times stronger than the current system, which is Helios. But we won't use those to kill anyone, right? Right now, we're just taking down drones, but they are making lasers mobile, like as in you can put them on your weapon and carry them around with you. And they say, once again, it's for shooting down drones. Because if you're in the military and you're like, drone, they can't know where I am, you can just shoot it down with your laser. But it's crazy because every government's military is currently spending a lot of money developing their own laser weaponry. They will become more powerful with longer ranges. They will be used however each government sees fit. We live in crazy times. Okay, so General William McCasland and Monica Raza, who are connected since he directly decided to fund Mandaloy, they both go missing in similar ways. They're both like avid outdoors people. They hike all the time. All of a sudden, they can't hike that day because they just accidentally go missing. Now, some people wonder if Mandaloy, the super alloy, was able to be created due to certain extraterrestrial materials that General McCasland may have been aware of during his work at Wright-Patterson. You know, certain materials that could have been reverse engineered. I mean, we did use Russia's rocket engines for a long time because we couldn't figure out how to make our own. But suddenly, Monica Raza and Dallas Hardwick figured it out, and McCasland and the Air Force, along with NASA, funded it. I don't know. Like, I'm more leaning towards it wasn't alien material that we re-engineered or reverse engineered because Russia kind of had already figured out how to do it. We may have reverse engineered Russia's stuff. That could be a possible thing. But does that mean I don't think we have alien spacecraft? No, it doesn't. I think we do. Actually, I think in this entire maze of deaths and disappearances of definite national security issues, everyone really isn't trying to figure out if these weird occurrences are connected or if they mean something. They're really trying to figure out like who's behind it and why. Is it aliens? Is it foreign entities trying to get the information these people had or trying to stop them from doing their work? Is it our own government trying to sneak these people away or get rid of them before someone else gets their hands on them? Is it because of what they know about these secret like SAP programs? What is it? We have so much more to talk about, but that will have to wait for another video. And if you're thinking I'm reaching or that it's not that serious, you should see the whiteboard in my office, okay? Because there are so many connections. But before we do go, we still have some more to talk about because I need to talk about the thing that's been in the news a lot lately, the actual news. And based on what we have talked about today, it might have something to do with all of this. Aliens. Because let's be honest, folks, they've been priming us for this for at least the last 10 years. In 2017, the New York Times revealed the existence of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. We're going to call it AATIP or ATIP, which is easier because I'm not saying all those words again. So starting around 2007, the ATIP was created to investigate aerial objects that could not be easily explained and might pose a national security threat. This program was led by Luis Elizondo, and allegedly the program officially ended around 2012, but after leaving government, Elizondo partnered with Tom DeLonge to the Stars Academy, and he acknowledged that ATIP did continue on for some time in some form after 2012. In 2022, we had in this country our first public congressional hearings on UFOs or UAPs in over 50 years. 2 key Pentagon officials testified: Ronald Moultrie, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and Scott Bray, the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence. And these were 2 of the people responsible for tracking and analyzing UAP data. Now, the biggest revelation from these hearings was that there were way more sightings of UAPs than expected. They said the number of reported UAP incidents had jumped to over 400 cases, and they described the sightings as frequent and continuing. And people were like, what? Frequent and continuing? This shocked people. We learned also that there had been at least 11 near-miss incidents between UAPs and U.S. aircraft, but in these hearings, they wanted to be very clear that these UAPs were not confirmed to be of extraterrestrial origin. They had not recovered alien materials, and there had been no communication attempt with the objects, which is like, why wouldn't you attempt to communicate with the objects and see who they were? Why wouldn't you do that? Like, That's weird. I would definitely have done that. So this hearing led to more formal efforts, including a study team commissioned by NASA and the creation of permanent UAP investigation offices, eventually evolving into All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which was established in July of 2022 within the Department of Defense. So in July of 2023, a group of U.S. senators, led by Chuck Schumer, introduced a major legislation aimed at forcing the government to release records related to UAPs. And this proposal became known as the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Disclosure Act of 2023. Why can't they give these things simpler names? But this act was heavily modeled after the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992. That was a law that required the government to collect all assassination-related records, review them systematically, and release them to the public unless there was a strong national security reason not to. So the Disclosure Act, which was not the JFK Act, it was the Alien Act, it proposed a centralized collection of all UAP records where every government agency would be required to basically search through what they had and turn over any UAP-related material. And this included military agencies, intelligence agencies, military contract records, so people like Aerojet Rocketdyne and people like Skunk Works, they would have to turn everything over. So basically, instead of secrecy being the default, they were going to try to release everything they could to the public, and records could only stay classified if there was a clear, specific national security risk, right? And then they would have to say what that national security risk was, or like prove it in some way. They couldn't just be like, that's a national security risk, and not show anything. And the records would have to be released within 25 years of creation, with older records being released much sooner after review. So in the bill, there was language about non-human intelligence and technologies of unknown origin. And this didn't necessarily confirm the existence of aliens, but it did show that lawmakers and people who are in government were taking the topic seriously enough to include this very broad, explicit language so that nobody could get around and say, well, you didn't ask for the non-human intelligence information. This was a pretty big deal because it wasn't fringe, it wasn't tinfoil hats, it was bipartisan, coming from top-level leadership and written into a major defense bill framework. We had hope, but then, of course, the original version of the bill was significantly watered down before it was passed, and some key provisions were removed or scaled back, especially around eminent domain over private UAP-related materials. So also in 2023, classified disclosures made by David Grush, who we talked about earlier, he had filed those with the Intelligence Community Inspector General. And this is the testimony we heard earlier, where David was stating that the U.S. governments and defense contractors have been running highly classified programs for decades, and the purpose of these programs is to recover and study crashed or landed craft of unknown origin, and they're keeping it secret from Congress. In late 2023, a wave of online discussion and some media commentary started circulating about a supposed soft disclosure process tied to UAPs, with a possible climax happening around 2027, which is hilarious because it appears that they hit the nail on the head, and we are right on schedule. Obviously, soft disclosure is not an official government term. It's a theory that instead of one shocking announcement to the public, like, hey, aliens exist, and we don't know what they want, or we do know and it's not good, instead of that, governments around the world, not just ours, would gradually introduce information over time so that they would avoid public panic by normalizing the topic and slowly increasing transparency. It's the whole frog in boiling water thing. And I feel like it has actually worked, right? Because there's so much going on in the world, and every time you turn on the news, it's just catastrophe and tragedy and the worst possible things happening. And then you get a story and you're like, aliens are real. They're in the oceans. And we're like, all right. So in March of 2024, the Pentagon was like, listen, everyone, just shut up about this now. We've looked into it. We've extensively searched. We've found no proof of extraterrestrial technology. There's no hidden alien craft or secret crash retrieval programs. You guys are crazy. There's no evidence that anyone is hiding any programs from Congress. And Congress was like, no, we aren't satisfied with that. We're still not getting clear answers from you secretive shadesters. And so Congress held a new public hearing in November of 2024, this time focused on transparency, whistleblower protections, and to figure out whether information was still being withheld, which of course it was and still is. And once again, key witnesses like Luis Elizondo and Michael Gold, who was a former NASA associate administrator, testified, and these witnesses said there's secret, illegal UAP retrieval programs happening, and UAP technology is interacting with humans. Okay, then we go to AARO's 2024 reporting. Remember, this was the system set up to track UAP settings. And once again, this showed a huge spike in reported UAP settings, more than 700 that year alone, with more than dozens unexplained and many of them labeled true anomalies that required further study. Enter 2025. Shit just starts getting weirder. And now it feels like all of this alien stuff is being dropped into our everyday lives in little tidbits that you wouldn't really notice or could go unnoticed if you weren't explicitly looking for it, which of course I have been. I love aliens. I've been looking for years for proof of what I know to be true. So Russ Coulthart, we talked about him already. He was on the News Nation interviews. He's not just on News Nation. He's an incredibly amazing investigative journalist. He's an acclaimed Australian investigative journalist. He works as a special correspondent for News Nation, where he hosts a segment called Reality Check. Ross is the real deal. He's not some oddball going live on YouTube for 17 hours wearing a tinfoil on his head or that guy from Ancient Aliens. He has gained huge respect and recognition for his investigative exposés on organized crime, corruption, military affairs. He knows what he's talking about. He's won countless awards for his work. But since about 2017, Ross has focused his reporting on UAPs. So in 2025, we start hearing that there could be extraterrestrial life in the oceans now, which does not surprise me, didn't then, doesn't now, because those oceans scare me more than space. I really think that there's something in there. Plus the dolphins. Should we talk about the dolphins? So here's Russ Coulthart discussing this on News Nation.
What is it about the coast of California? Why do you think we have so many reported encounters there?
Hello, Elizabeth. Look, I don't think it's a coincidence that California is the home to some of the biggest aerospace companies in America. And it's also probably the closest point where if you were a non-human civilization, you could hide yourself very successfully in thousands of meters of water with a reasonable degree of certainty that you wouldn't be detected. There are, as we know, huge gulfs of water just off the coast of California. The Baja California area is where the US Nimitz incident happened in 2004. And we know also that there's been repeated sightings of anomalous phenomena, not just that boat captain, Thor, but many, many dozens, in fact, hundreds of sightings have taken place around Catalina Island, just off the coast of LA. And I guess I'm only speculating here, but if you were an alien civilization, 71% of the planet's surface is water. And if you're looking for a neutral environment that's temperature consistent with low light where you want to hide, if there is an alien species targeting this planet, and a lot of people think there is, including certain congressmen, that would be the place to hide.
Yeah, and I have noted on the show before, 27% of the ocean is mapped out by humans. We've mapped out 27% of our oceans. We know more about the surface of Mars and the surface of the moon than we do about our own oceans.
That's so true. And Elizabeth, I'll tell you, I've spoken to submariners who are working out of the submarine fleet with nuclear submarines up near Seattle there. And they've told me that they've recorded anomalous phenomena moving faster than the speed of sound underwater. Like that's let's say faster than 1,000 knots underwater. We don't have any craft in the human technology that's capable.
Pressure, the water pressure that it's hard to swim in the ocean,
So we have this very silly situation where even under the current administration, there's a kind of a denial about the possibility of non-human intelligence or NHI. But the people who are coming forward to me and to Ben Hansen in this story are basically people who've worked on the water around Catalina Island. We've spoken to people in the military, and there is a vast number of people who are willing to go on the record to say they have witnessed anomalous phenomena underwater doing extraordinary things.
Catalina Island. Isn't that where Natalie Wood fell off her boat? Anyways, yeah. Stuff moving underwater at the speed of light. No big deal. Let's just talk casually about that and then go on about our lives. So yeah, we get little breadcrumbs throughout 2025. And And then 2026 hits. That brings us to present day. Randomly, Donald Trump says he's going to order to have the UFO data released. And at first I was like, what are you doing? What are you trying to distract me from? Okay, what are you saying? Look over here, everyone, while we do something over there kind of thing. That could be true, but I won't lie. I was intrigued. Then we have the Artemis moon mission, NASA's first attempt to send humans to the moon since the Apollo era of 1972. But this mission actually has a very different goal, and they're not really talking about that. Like, they're showing it on TV, and the astronauts are up there, and they're like waving, and they're like, everything's great, we love this, here's the dark side of the moon. But what did they go there for? They didn't just want to walk on the moon, right? NASA wants to establish a long-term, sustainable human presence on the moon. NASA, along with commercial and international partners, is planning to establish habitats, solar power systems, and rovers for construction on the moon. And this is supposed to be like a stepping stone to eventually get to Mars, so that maybe we can like build stuff there and live there. It's a critical test bed for learning how to survive on other worlds. And they're specifically picking the area of the moon that they are because they said there's a lot of dark craters there and there could be water. They think there's water in there. So for this, NASA is using the Space Launch System, their most powerful rocket ever, powered by 4 RS-25 engines built by Aerojet Rocketdyne. I was wondering if Mandaloy was used in the engines of the Artemis mission. I looked it up, and the specs don't say. They don't say Mandaloy. They do, however, say the engines use nickel-based superalloys designed to survive extreme heat and pressure in oxygen-rich environments. I wish that Monica could see all her hard work going into space and going to the moon, but she's been missing. So let's talk about the timeline for these missing and murdered scientists really quick. These researchers and people with super secret security clearance and all of this knowledge. We haven't gone in depth with all of them yet. We've talked about Monica and we've talked about the general, but we will if you're willing to continue on this journey with me. I'm just going to focus on 6 of them for now. General McCasland, Monica Raza, Melissa Cassius, Jason Thomas, Carl Grillmere, Nuno Lareo. These incidents all went down between 2025 and 2026, and I've grouped them together by date and location. Because they seem random at first, but like I said, you start putting them all out, not random. Monica Raza goes missing on a hike in June of 2025. Melissa Cassius, who worked at Los Alamos Labs in New Mexico, mysteriously disappeared in June of 2025 after factory resetting both her personal and work cell phone. In December of 2025, Nuno Lareo, director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center, a nuclear scientist who had research contracts with the Department of Energy, he was shot at his front door in Massachusetts. The person they say did it, the same guy that they claim is the Brown University shooter, and that guy took his own life, so we can't ask him. Also, in December of 2025, Jason Thomas, a senior biomedical researcher at Novartis in Boston, disappeared. His remains were found a few months later, I believe in March, in a lake. No cause of death has been released. All right, so those both happened the same month. General McCasland, who's, as we have already discussed, is super important, has a lot of secret government and military information. He walks away from his home in New Mexico, and he vanishes. That same month and same year, Carl Grillmere was shot and killed on the front porch of his home in Antelope Valley, California. Carl was an astronomer and astrophysicist, a research scientist at Caltech, and also heavily involved in some of NASA's most prominent missions, including the Hubble Space Telescope and NEOWISE, which is NASA's mission where they use a space telescope to hunt for asteroids and comets in our solar system that could impact Earth. And when he died, Carl was working on something called the NEO Surveyor, a new space telescope that he helped design, which is even more sensitive and good at detecting objects in space. Basically, Carl built the systems, the algorithms that would find these dark, cold objects against the even darker and colder space atmosphere using the heat that the objects borrow from the sun, which is interesting, very interesting. And I mean, with all these asteroids and things hitting the Earth randomly, we'll talk about that. It's very interesting. So the NEO Surveyor is being developed by the Jet Propulsion Lab, which, as we know, is managed by NASA at Caltech. Now, let's look at the locations. Carl Grillmere and Monica Raza, California. Jason Thomas and Nuno Lareo, Massachusetts. Melissa Cassius and General McCasland, New Mexico. All of these places fall into what is known as the Defense Aerospace corridor, geographic clusters in the U.S. where military, aerospace intelligence, and advanced research are heavily concentrated and interconnected. Let's go back to Russ Coulthart and see what he thinks about all of this.
Oh, hi, Natasha. The thing that worries me most of all is the question, does the general not want to be found? I know some people are pointing towards possible suicide, but I was happy to see in that report that Alex clarified that there's no evidence the general was suicidal, and his wife has actually spoken very highly of his mental capacities. And friends of his who travelled with him, they tell me that a week earlier he'd actually cycled 60 miles. So this is not a man who was at the end of his life, somebody who was contemplating possible mental incapacity. He wasn't suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. There doesn't seem to be any motivation for suicide. I do think we have to ask now the possibility of foul play. Is there somebody who has interceded to take the general out of the picture? He was a man with some of the most sensitive US military intelligence secrets in his head, especially particle beam technology. And as Alex acknowledged, he was involved in abortive attempts prior to the Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump election campaign in 2016 to negotiate with John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, about, believe it or not, UAP transparency. There was a discussion underway in which General McCasland was involved. It's a matter of public record now. The disappearance of General McCasland closely follows the announcement by President Trump that he will, and he has pledged to do this, be making a disclosure about UAPs, extraterrestrials.
Yeah, absolutely. We know McCasland worked for several government programs, including the Global Positioning System, or GPS, the Space-Based Laser Project Office, the Air Force Research Laboratory, just to name a few. Do you think any of his positions made him a potential target? And also, we saw in that report, the Russians once hacked his email. I mean, what do you make of his wife saying no one would be interested in 13-year-old secrets? Do you agree?
Well, certainly his wife made the point that there's been no change in his security clearance since 2013. But what that obscures is that since he left the service of the US Air Force, he's been working with a private military contractor that has been directly involved in particle beam technology research. It's very common for people like the general, very senior military officers with extensive knowledge from their military service, to go into private service. And he's been very heavily involved in secret programs that are part of special access programs with the US and intelligence departments, which frankly are still ongoing. So the idea that somehow his knowledge is dated or obsolescent doesn't hold. He is an extremely important military figure with incredibly important secrets inside his head, and his disappearance, I know for a fact, is an issue of grave concern to people at the highest levels of the Pentagon.
Ross isn't done. Okay, he still has more to say.
The public has been lied to, and President Trump realized this. And the interesting thing is, what's happening at the moment is Trump has very slowly started indicating that he's willing to pull back the layers, to show the public what the deep state, and this does fit with his moral narrative, that there's this deep state that has been withholding information from the American public, and indeed, he believes, trying to undermine his authority and his potential leadership. So for him, there's a motivation in revealing what he knows. Now, I got told by people very close to the Trump camp that in his first administration, he was going to make a disclosure about UAPs.
And what happened?
He got scared. I'm sorry to have to say this about the most powerful person in the world, but the commander-in-chief of the US military was scared of his own government. He became aware that there are forces inside the US government that frankly would and have killed to protect this secret. And he wasn't entirely confident that he could feel safe in making a statement at the time about what he knows.
So many people would say, that's impossible. Donald Trump feels as though he's omnipotent at this point, given all of the actions that he's taken recently by executive action, going to war without Congress, et cetera. What kind of people would have any kind of threat power over the president?
For quite some time, there has been a warning in America, and it goes right back to President Eisenhower's speech when he left office. And if you remember, he talked about a military-industrial complex that was out of control. And that was quite something from the man who'd led America to victory in World War II. President Eisenhower, in one of the last statements that he made as the President of the United States, warned the American public that he was concerned that there was a military-industrial complex that was actually getting out of control. What I've been investigating for much of the last 8 years, and every time I start digging, I find more and more to substantiate this view, is that there is a private military contractor industrial complex that is completely out of control. A lot of what is going on in America at the moment is due to the fact that trillions of dollars have been expended on expenditure that is being kept secret from the American public. This isn't something that's been concealed, the fact of this expenditure. You might remember that prior to 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld, the Defense Secretary, actually admitted that there were trillions of dollars that couldn't be accounted for in the defense budget. There are people like Catherine Austin Fitts, a former very senior government official, who's admitted that when she did audits, there were vast amounts of US defence expenditure that could not be accounted for. But what has been going on is a lot of what America knows about the UAP mystery has been privatised. It's gone into the private world. And I know that there have been literally blue-on-blue confrontations where American troops under the command of JSOC were actually sent to retrieve a craft, an object that crashed, I think it was in Mexico, and in the course of their attempted retrieval, US Special Forces soldiers were killed or wounded by private military contractors who were trying to protect what was allegedly their technology. And this is how absurd it's got, that this ridiculous Cold War has been going on between the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans. There's been so much secrecy now about this legacy program involving the retrieval of non-human technology. Not only are we in competition with the Russians and Chinese over it, there are battles, in some cases deaths, where people have been killed in an effort to protect and retrieve this technology. That's how serious this is. I've spoken to people who say that people have been murdered to protect this secret. Now, this is what we've been trying to get Congress to investigate, but sadly, Congress has shown that it's completely ineffectual and very much in the thrall of many of these private military contractors that exercise such an undue influence in the Congress.
Okay, so then I think it was April 1st, former Congressman Matt Gaetz. I'm not up on politics and who's bad and who's good and who we should hate. And I just take the information in and then see kind of who confirms it and what we know about it. But I hear Matt Gaetz is bad. I don't pay enough attention because I think all politicians are bad. But anyways, Matt Gaetz, he goes on this show or podcast and he says he has talked to a U.S. Army whistleblower who briefed him on secret alien-human hybrid breeding programs. This alleged program involves captured extraterrestrials mating with humans who have been abducted from war zones and migrant caravans to create hybrids for multiple things, including remote viewing, intergalactic communication. Now, I know some of you are like, ugh, I can't believe we're talking about this. This is so ludicrous. This is so ridiculous. Does it sound like something our government wouldn't do? Does it? That's all I'm going to say. Okay, so now let's go back to Congressman Tim Burchett, who was asked about Matt Gaetz's claims.
Okay, I want to play you a soundbite. Former colleague of yours, Matt Gaetz, making some pretty shocking statements yesterday about aliens. Take a look.
I had someone come and brief me who was in a military uniform, worked for the United States Army, that was briefing me on the locations of hybrid breeding programs where captured aliens were breeding with humans to create some hybrid race that could engage in intergalactic communication. Aliens that were living were in forced breeding programs with humans that had been abducted from war zones and from even the caravans of migrants.
All right. I mean, I don't have the tinfoil hat on just yet, Congressman, but I'm wondering, kind of how you react to that, because you are connected. You're on the UFO subcommittee. I mean, I'm just wondering what you make of that. Have you heard anything like that?
Well, I'm still a member of Congress, so I can't really comment too much on what Matt said. But I will say this.
Wait, seriously? Are you being serious, or is that tongue in cheek?
I've been 100% serious. I've been 100% serious. I've been briefed by just about every alphabet agency there is. And I'll just tell you this. If they would release the things that I've seen, you would stay up. You'd be up at night worrying about or thinking about this stuff. We just need to disclose it all. I'm sick of it. Well, I was briefed. I'll just tell you this. I was briefed last week on an issue, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago. And it would have set the earth on. This country would have come unglued, I think, if they would have heard all that I heard. They would demand answers. And we need to. But, it's never going to get, unfortunately, it just keeps getting covered up. And the people that know are dying or disappearing, as the case may be.
Wow.
And for the record, I'm not suicidal and I don't take risks. So,
I'm glad you said that. I'm speechless, Congressman. We will have you back.
You should be.
I am.
The president, release it all. And the problem is the people that are around the president don't know and the president doesn't know the questions to ask. A few of us are going to have to get with the president and tell him what he needs to ask and where he needs to look. I mean, we're in meetings and they give addresses and tell locations of items, I'll just say. And the public has a right to know, dadgummit. It's your tax dollars.
Absolutely.
Let's get it out there.
You got my.
So at first you can hear him. He says, this stuff that I know, you would stay up at night worried. And then he quickly pivoted and recovered. And he said you'd stay up thinking about this stuff. Remember, he's a sitting member of Congress. So Tim Burchett's still going to follow the party line of soft disclosure, not causing widespread panic. So that's kind of where we're at. And there's more coming out every day. It's been an interesting time. I will say it is an interesting time to be alive, but that's probably enough for today, even though there's so much more to talk about. But let's take some time to think on all of this for a while, chat about it in the comments. I'll be filming the next Epstein installment very soon. I'm almost done with the script on that one, so look out for that. Let me know if you want me to continue talking about all of this in future videos. We still have more to talk about. We still have these other scientists where there's a lot more to talk about, a lot more connections to make. So let me know if you want me to continue with that. We will continue with Epstein. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe, and I'll see you very, very soon. Love you. Bye.